Today I wanted to talk about porn. India is one of the largest consumers of porn globally, and it looks like we're consuming even more porn than before during lockdown. And while the stereotype is that only men watch porn, in fact, of course, women watch porn too. According to Pornhub's data, almost a quarter of India's viewers are female. So is porn helpful or harmful? And how can we ensure that we shape our relationship with porn such that it influences healthier, more positive sexual experiences instead of gender unequal and violent ones? On the one hand, porn can provide the viewer with an experience of arousal or pleasure, minus any possibility of criticism, rejection, infection, or pregnancy. Masturbation and porn can therefore be a very healthy outlet for our sexual curiosities and our sexual needs. Also, watching porn can make people feel more comfortable with their sexuality when they see their desires normalized and validated. It can also help expand sexual expression and sexual experimentation between partners. In fact, studies suggest that when couples watch porn together, it is often correlated with more dedication to the relationship, increased sexual satisfaction, and even higher levels of intimacy. Porn, of course, can also improve communication between couples. For example, you both might see something and one of you might say, "Let's try this," or "No way, we're never doing that." It makes it easier for couples to think about and talk about sex together. But all too often, despite these benefits, mainstream porn can be super problematic. Too often, there is ambiguity when it comes to consent. The scene itself may be a non-consensual act, and/or it may be non-consensually filmed. Also, even when, or perhaps especially when, it's a professionally shot clip made by a big studio, often the imagery in mainstream porn creates negative self-image, promotes unrealistic body expectations of oneself and one's partner, reiterates traditional and regressive gender roles, as well as absurd racial stereotypes. It also tends to promote this really theatrical view of sex, often without the use of protection, and it tends to cater primarily to the male gaze, with a very narrow and often misogynistic purview of desire. The imagery, the aesthetics, the storyline, pretty much everything about a lot of mainstream porn tends to reinforce negative social biases and inequalities, as well as encourage violence. And you see this even in the way that clips are titled or categorized on regular porn sites. The focus shifts away from the fact that people are experiencing pleasure and instead reduces them to their gender, size, age, ethnicity, or body type. Take, for example, the most popular categories of mainstream porn consumed in India. It's important that we talk about porn because for most young people in the digital era, porn is where their first ideas of sex come from. It's their first visual reference point for what sex might look and feel like. Something like 50% of people are now coming into contact with porn for the first time as young as age 10 or 11. Porn can therefore often shape what we think of as the way that sex should be. And so if we are watching porn, and clearly as a nation we are, I want to just remind you guys how important it is that we choose what to watch carefully. Simply put, we should only watch ethical porn. So what is ethical porn? It's porn where the performers are all 18 plus, where there is consent from all parties, and where performers have a say in who they perform with as well as what scenes they're comfortable with. The environment is also health controlled, including stuff like regular STD testing and safe working conditions for both the performers and the crew. There's also representation of diverse body types, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, and themes. Ethical porn sites don't categorize content the way other porn sites do. They don't stereotype and fetishize based on how performers look. Ethical porn makes it a point to portray sex as a healthy and positive outlet for pleasure, intimacy, and discovery. The clips often have movie-like titles that are more creative and sensual. So instead of seeing a title like "MILF with Big Titties Gets Rammed," you're going to see beautiful, evocative titles like "Honeydew" or "Hungry for Your Touch." The aesthetics, casting, production, and values are similarly much more sensitive and sensual than in traditional mainstream porn. Ethical porn is often created very much with the intention to ensure that it helps make people feel more comfortable and happier about their bodies and their sexuality. There's an equal focus on female pleasure and a conscious attempt at representing diversity instead of portraying the narrow, typical cis-hetero definitions of what is attractive and what sex should look like. Personally, mainstream porn never turned me on at all, so I never never really bothered watching much porn. It was only after I discovered ethical porn that I realized that the porn I'd seen so far had just been rubbish porn. It was a really pleasant surprise to me that porn could be this way. Ethical porn can be a healthy way to learn about sexuality, the body, and pleasure, instead of one that reiterates damaging gender and racial stereotypes as well as glorifies violence. So why would anyone watch porn that isn't ethical? Exactly. Why? Well, guess what? As a viewer, you have the ability to help shape the porn industry and help ensure that all decisions from casting to distribution to the types of situations presented are ethical. And how do you do that? Simply by watching only ethical porn. So if you like watching porn, learn which production companies are driven by ethics. Choose to watch only porn that you know is ethical. Also, be willing to pay for it. For porn to be made professionally and ethically, performers and filmmakers need to be paid equitably. So be willing to pay for ethical porn just the way you're willing to pay for any other product that you like and consume ethically. I'm going to make your quest for ethical porn much easier by recommending some great places to start. Just remember this one name, Erika Lust. She's an award-winning Swedish filmmaker, and she is hands down the queen of ethical porn. Check out her site eroticfilms.com for the best of ethical indie adult cinema from across the globe. Also check out xconfessions.com. It's a crowdsourced project by Erika Lust where users can anonymously submit their sexual fantasies, and the 2 best ones are chosen each month and produced into a beautiful erotic short clip. There are also many other sites that feature only ethical porn. Once you start looking for it, it's really not that hard to find. So look for it. Refuse to watch porn that might be non-consensually or exploitatively made. Apart from all the obvious things like consent and safety, what I appreciate about ethical porn is that it tends to be creative, explorative, and authentic. There's attention given to the emotional aspects of eroticism, rather than presenting sex as a unidimensional physical act devoid of emotion. There's a lot of steamy passion and lust and desire, but there's also intimacy and nuance and a keen attention to providing pleasure to all the senses. And believe me, it makes it so much harder. Plus, there are none of those stupid pop-up windows. We all deserve better porn, and guess what? It's out there. We just have to make the right choice.